and thank you for joining us, CASBO, and our Forecast5 professionals for the next in our summer speaker series. This is Macro to Micro, the impact of global pandemic on your district. I appreciate your time today. We've worked really hard to bring you thus far and continue to add to a lineup of folks that are so relevant in the environment in which we're working today. To use the word, budget cuts, is just such a generalized term of what we're struggling through. But this is one that we wanted to bring you because we too at CASBO are using Forecast5 as we look at the implications of the decisions that districts are needing to make in order to reopen schools, at a state level, what the impacts of some of these budget cuts are going to be. It's a tool that we're using. So we really felt that it was important to bring this insight to you today to allow you to make the decisions that you're making around the budget implications and cuts and such in a highly informed, and intelligent manner. We use the likeliness of a surgeon who would not just sort of open you up and then kind of decide where to go from there and just start kind of hacking away, right? It's a matter of the right instruments and tools, medication to make it all a little bit less painful. I think that's an appropriate one. And, in the monitoring system so that, by using tools that are effective in those areas, you're doing your work and making your decisions with precision. So with no further ado, I want to introduce my cohort here. I'm Tasha Davenport. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Chief Operations Officer for CASBO. And I'm joined by Sarah Bachez, our Chief Governmental Relations Officer, who has been working tirelessly with our advocacy team, better informing our policymakers, and again, using this tool to help us understand some of the implications around those decisions. She's also been great at gathering all the information, whether it be from the other sessions we've had, all the question answer, turning that back not only to the policymakers, but also to our registrants and participants in all of these sessions. So just to let you know, that information will be coming back to you in terms of that question answer format. A couple logistics before we get started. We do have a question and answer feature. Feel free to start loading your questions in there. We have time at the end to allow for those. We will answer any that we don't get to in a later format, as mentioned, with all the hard work that Sarah and team are doing. We have a PDF in the chat available for you of this presentation, and we are recording it. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff Carew, who's the Managing Director of Forecast5, and his team of presenters with exceptional experience in the work that you're doing in school business, and also exceptional experience in using data to drive informed decisions. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Tasha, and thank you, CASBO, for putting on this particular program. We very much appreciate the opportunity to be part of it. The CASBO series of webinars over the last couple of weeks has delivered some fabulous information, challenging information for school districts. And our goal today is to bring that information that you've learned from FCMAT and from school services and bring that information home and down to the district level. And in doing that, I present to you our panel for today, a team of advisors from Forecast5. Adam Saline and Melissa Higdon have worked behind the scenes in building out this particular presentation. Most of our time will be spent by some California veterans in Bill McGuire and Vince Kriskakis, as they will share stories, they will share strategies, and they will share how to use tools in which to meet the challenges that you are faced with. So we are really looking forward to this program and the development of it, really taking a look at how we're utilizing data to inform our decisions and using our forecast to really kind of drive home those particular decisions. Our agenda for today is, first of all, Vince is going to review what that May revision really means to your district. And what it really means to your district is there's challenges ahead. We're going to talk about how benchmarking with your peer districts can really help you meet some of those challenges. We're going to look at your multi-year projections and really be able to identify the structural deficit. We're going to talk about how you can present this information to your board and to your stakeholders clearly and concisely so that everybody has an understanding of where the district needs to go. And then finally, we're going to really talk about leading your district through this crisis, making sure that you stay strong on the educational side, but you maintain that fiscal solvency. And with that agenda, I will turn it over for Vince to talk about that May revision.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And yes, this is a difficult time for everybody. And so, as we know, the governor released his May revision and proposal for the budget. And so we have that information. We've now, most of us have heard from FCMAT, from CASBO, from AXA, from school services and other entities. The school services workshop that they do every year on the May revise is a lot of the information that we will be using in our forecasts and projections. Okay, and you've had now some time to digest that information. So what's next? So let's go to the next slide. And so what we have learned so far at the LCFF funding now is being reduced, a net of about 7.92% from the 2019-20 funding. We also know that categorical fundings are being reduced, in some cases up to 50%. We also have deferrals that are coming back in the current year, deferring final payments in this year to the first month of the following year. And also, there may be some flexibility that we could use in the on-behalf payments for STRS, PERS, for calculating our routine restricted maintenance account and possibly the reserve for economic uncertainties, which could become a savings overall when we take a look at that. So it feels very similar to the Great Recession. And, as we know, and the people who were around during that period of time, there's a lot of lessons we've learned. There's a lot of, I want to say institutional knowledge, hopefully, that's left in some of your districts that you can go back and tap into. Let's go to the next slide. And so one of the things we want to do is start off with a planning process. And this goes to, the simple steps of problem solving that we should be using. And usually the first step in any kind of a problem like this is to identify the size, the magnitude of the problem. What is the problem and how big is it? And then we should be moving forward. And these things should be done hand in hand with your board. So at a scheduled board meeting, and I know a lot of you maybe have already had these meetings, and then setting up this process, the board may be setting some objectives and criteria as to how they would like to see the plan proceed and the kinds of things we would be looking at, collecting up ideas and solutions from all the different stakeholders, evaluating those things, and then create options to fix the problem and to present those options in a very clear manner to your board. So that's sort of where we're headed. So let's go to the next one. So the first step in this whole process, and now that we have all the information from the May revise, is to identify a clear statement of the problem. So in this case, we're going to be talking about a fictitious district based on maybe an actual district, but we're going to call it the Awesome Unified School District. And so this could be a good statement of the problem, which is the structural deficit has formed in the district's general fund due to the 7.92 reduction in LCFF funding and 10 to 50% reduction in categorical programs. So that kind of gives you, what the problem is, and now what's the magnitude of it is the district's expenditures now must be reduced by about $28.75 million to remain fiscally solvent over the next 3 years. So that's sort of the statement that would lead us throughout the rest of this, presentation. So let's go to the next slide. So here is one of the ways when we took the information from the May revise for the Awesome Unified School District and we applied all the changes that came from the governor's updates. We charted out the revenues. This is on the left-hand side chart with the red line and the blue line being the revenues, the red line being the expenditures. And we said, what will this do to us? And as you can see on the right side, that is the ending balance chart. And it may be hard to see, but up in the very top left of that chart is about $48 million ending balance. You can see by the time you hit fiscal year 2021, you go below zero. So that $28 million cuts down that $48 million in less than 2 years, and you'll be in trouble. So that's why the identifying that magnitude of that issue is so important to know how much we really need to set our targets for. So let's go to the next one. So this is the assumptions. This comes right from school services. Everybody uses the school services dartboard. These are the recommendations that they made for COLAs going forward. And so now we can start to really take a look at some of our total expenditures and do what we call the macro to micro analysis. And I think coming up next should be Adam to start talking about this. If you go to the next slide, we'll see. Okay, one more thing I want to make a point of. Even though in the governor's budget we had these cuts, he also had this language which is unusual, which is called the trigger off, which means when we start getting revenues from the federal government, then through the CARES Act or the HEROES Act, things like that, then some of these measures would get triggered off, and we would start to go back to normal funding and use these dollars from the federal government. But we can't really count on that, and that's something that we need to then solve the problem that's in front of us right now, which is right now it's the May revise issue. And as we know, things will always change once you get to the final budget, but we have to be prepared. So let's go to the next slide. I think this is where, Adam, you're going to start talking about going from the macro level down to the micro level using some data. So I'll turn it back to Adam.
Thank you, Vince. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone's time today. And I know you guys want to hear from Vince, you want to hear from Bill, so we're going to get back to them real soon. But I would like to share some of what we've been doing with clients, both in California and other states. And I just want, before we get into this, I want you to know that we're going to go through this with the lens of this awesome unified district. But if you want help with some of these concepts, please reach out to us and let us know. We can help talk through all of this. But yes, what we're going to do in this next section here is talk through using some historical and comparative data to really help us make some better decisions here. And so we're going to try to understand some of the trends following the last recession. So we're going to look at some history for this awesome unified district. We're definitely going to talk through analyzing peer district data. This is going to help us identify areas where we may be able to reduce spending and also bring some context to our own data. And then throughout all of this, we're going to share some visuals with you that might be helpful in your own case. We know there's hard decisions you're going to have to make, and I know you guys are all probably really in tune with your data and what it means, but you're going to have a tough job explaining this to everyone else that doesn't quite work with this data all the time. And so we've produced some visuals that might give you some ideas on how to share your own story. So the first thing we're going to get into is a methodology we use with clients, districts in California, as well as districts in a lot of other states. What we've done here is we've taken your line item expenditures, and we're doing this at an object level, but of course you could pick any dimension that you want to get into if you want to do it by function or something else. And basically what we've done is we've pulled these line items into rows. And we've brought in the spending for this awesome unified school district, as well as the peer districts that are similar. And these are not districts that are just right next door. These are districts that are similar in size, similar in student demographic. And what we've done is we've identified the standard deviation from the mean. And what we're trying to do is identify areas where we can immediately investigate. Where's the biggest issues? Where are we spending way more than our peer districts? using a standard deviation calculation might help you easily identify these areas. And if you don't have a starting point, this is a great way to get there. So this is what we've done for this district. It's one method we use, but I'm going to share another method in a moment. But as you can see, the top portion is going to be the visual aspect, but the bottom portion is the grid, where you're simply seeing the line items for this district that are the farthest away from the average. And if you're a little rusty on the standard deviation calculation, look it up. It might be helpful for you. And basically what we're doing is identifying the line items that are beyond 2 deviations. And essentially what that's saying is this awesome unified school district is spending more than 90-something% of the other districts in this analysis. And so that's probably where we want to start the conversation, looking at those items that are the farthest outside of their peer group. Now, we can continue on if you're not in love with this standard deviation calculation. If that's not your cup of tea, that's fine. Another way to do a similar analysis like this is to, again, bring in your peer district spending by line item. And what you can actually do is pull this data for historical years. And what you can do is simply find the average amount spent per pupil amongst the peer group, and then analyze where your district ranks. And when you bring in the historical years, what you quickly see are there line items that this district, this awesome unified district, is consistently spending more than their peers. These are areas where it might be an easy way to reduce spending, or it might be an area that someone's going to ask you about. So this is one way. This is a visual way of looking at it, but of course you can look at this if you just want to see the numbers in a grid. You can do it that way too. So what we did is we did this for Awesome Unified, and there's a few line items that you could point out here, but the two that we're going to point out just for the sake of time are the object code 4300, materials and supplies, and then object code 5800, professional and consulting services. And you can see that that big orange dot represents Awesome Unified. These are two areas where they're spending more than the average of the peer group and where they've done that in multiple years. We only fit 2 years on the slide, but we actually went back a few years to do this. And so what we did is we actually took that spending, and this is the analysis laid out in a graphical format. What we've done is the blue columns represent how much Awesome Unified is spending inside of this object 4300 materials and supplies. The yellow columns represent that group average. And then what you see is a gray column at the far right of each year there. That represents the dollar difference. And what you'll notice is Awesome Unified is absolutely spending more than the peer group. We already noticed that. And as you can see, that difference is actually getting larger for the last 3 years. And if we continue on, what we said is, if we can reduce the spending here, and if we can simply reduce the spending just to the group average, so not even spending less than everyone, but just simply spending at the average. The group average is about 6.3 million inside of this object. Awesome Unified currently spends in the most recent fiscal year, FY19, over 10.5 million. If they can simply reduce their spending to the average of their group, they could potentially save over 4 million. I know these are big numbers, but these are districts with big budgets. And we did the same thing here with that object 5800, professional and consulting services. And what you're seeing is the same exact trend. You don't quite see the rise in the difference over the last 3 years, but that's because it's a pretty large difference across those last 3 years. And we did the same thing. If you compare that spending, this time they're not the absolute top, but they're still spending more than the group average. If they can simply reduce their spending to that average, they can potentially save over 7.5 million. So this is just one way to analyze these expenditures, find areas where you might be able to reduce, or at least provide some context to share with your board or your stakeholders. I'm going to move on now from the expenditure conversation, and we can take a look at some other data. We looked at their student-to-teacher FTE ratio for Awesome Unified over the last few years. And just like almost every district in the state of California, their ratio used to be much higher. They were at a higher point following the last recession. Just about every district was. And this is a comparison of the most recent year. As you can see, for this district compared to their group, they're actually on the lower end. And we can take this data and look at how it's changed over time in regards to their enrollment data. So in the years following the recession, this awesome unified school district actually saw a decrease in enrollment, but they were increasing their staff FTE. Again, something that I've seen at a lot of districts in California. And even though they've made some cuts from 18 to 19, there might still be some ways to go there if needed. But this is a way to just look at the data, look at your history, understand where you've been, and understand potentially where you might have to end up. Going forward, beyond just the teacher FTE ratio, we wanted to bring some context here related to classified FTE. This district currently staffs about 1,400, a little bit over 1,400 classified FTE. And when you're comparing with this group of districts that are similar in size and demographic, they're definitely on the higher end. So again, it just gives you some context to your own data. We also wanted to take a look at how they've historically been spending money on salaries and how that's changed over time and how that compares with the peer group. So what you're looking at are two graphics. The one on top shows the dollars per pupil comparison. We have Awesome Unified highlighted, and as you can see, they're one of the top spenders there for the amount spent on objects 1,000 to 2,999, so certificated and classified salaries. What you notice is the bottom grid there shows the percent of total, and it's actually gone down a little bit as a percent of total, but it's still right around the 60% mark for their amount of total spending. And another piece that we've been talking about a lot with school districts, again, in California, as well as a lot of our states, is analyzing the trend in fund balance. And so what you're looking at here is the general fund balance trend for Awesome Unified. What you're seeing are the blue columns representing the amount, and then that orange line represents the percent of total. So are you in a position, and I'm sorry, percent of total spending. And so are you in a position where you have good reserves? I've been looking at this data for a lot of districts, and they've definitely been stacking up. But are you in a position where you're prepared? You can see the most recent year, that 18%. How one of my teammates likes to talk about this is if no money came in, how long could this district last throughout the year? And for Awesome Unified, they can last about 18% of the year. They can handle 18% of their expenditures before they've depleted the resources there. And you can take this information and compare that. So now we're just looking at that percent of total, but we're comparing with this peer group, again, of like-sized districts. And for this analysis, they happen to be right in the middle. Some districts definitely have more as a percent of total, and some districts definitely have less. So just giving some relevancy to your own information. So that's what I wanted to share in regards to the historical and comparative data. That was a little bit of the macro point, and then we're going to get now into deeper detail. But again, let us know if you want to talk through any of these concepts. I will now pass it over to Bill.
Thank you, everybody. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow up with the discussions that we had with Vince and with Adam, and we're going to look at how that really works in a school district and in the scenarios that each and every one of us needs to put together. So, again, we can be solvent in 2020, 22, 23, and what is that going to take? And so next slide, maybe. I don't have control. There we go. So just to make things more exciting, Awesome Unified is this fictitious district with 25,000 kids. It's in the 80 to 90 UPP. It's declining, has a structural deficit. So it's got problems already, right? Now we add that 7.92 reduction to the LCFF, and then we plan 0 in the out years. They're going to take a 10% reduction in TIG and transportation. We've updated PERS as CalSTRS, which has helped them. We've updated additional state revenues from special ed, going to help them. Bringing in CARES funds, right? And CARES funds is going to help us, but we spent about half of it already, and we're going to spend the other half opening up schools. So we're going to use all of the money that we're getting from CARES to handle the problems that we have from COVID. Now, in 1920, we all know that we had a lot of expenditures that were not made. So what we need to do is scrub the budget, make sure that we know that our ending balance is going to be higher going into the year, right, than what we had projected at second interim. Now, with that, though, we also got to scrub the 2021 data of non-essential expenditures. And I'm not talking about doing massive budget cuts in your budget year, but really making sure there's no one-time expenditures that are following. There's no one-time revenues that, we've allocated for insurance correctly and all those kind of things. Don't make cuts, right, that you're not going to get any credit for. Make sure that you're making reductions that are going to be board approved or a formal policy change, because we all know that good CBOs every day are making reductions within their budget. But at the same time, what we have to be able to do is make sure that all of these reductions and all of these scenarios are vetted so that within the system, so that when we come out on the other end, we have as much buy-in as possible. Okay, still trying to move that slide. Thank you very much. So within that, we have how do we normally do things? And we normally do things with operational efficiencies, traditional budget cuts, easy to implement large savings, but these cuts are so big, we got to start looking at strategic resource allocation, right? What do we have and where do we have it and what can we do? The difficult to implement, right, small savings, you really don't take any action on that. So we got to move off the bottom of this chart and move up to the top, but we have to take care of the bottom of the chart before we can move up to the top of the chart. So next slide. So again, this is the same chart that we were looking at before, but really is all of those assumptions that we have in there and why the revenues fall off so much in 2022 is the amount of CARES funds that the district is receiving and then spending. But as Vince was talking about, the problem is the first year out, they have a $31 million, so if you look at the second year, FY 2020 is the actual 19-20 year, current year we're in. And even with that reserve that they have, because of the loss of revenue, right, and expending our CARES funds for expenditures that are up and coming, not shifting our existing expenditures, they're going to be negative in the first year. They're going to be further negative and further negative. So we know that what that means is conditional budget approval, right, if at best. Right, and then the board coming up with a resolution and actions and all of the things associated with that. Now, what's going to happen, if I can go to the next slide, is that we will do the same thing we've always done. And what we did was we looked at Awesome Unified School District, and I used a product called 5CAST to be able to do this, to do these scenarios of taking the budget that we have and quickly implementing scenarios and then being able to produce these visuals, charts and graphs, because what people get is the visual, right? And so on this is a 10% across the board reduction in the unrestricted salaries, benefits, everything, right? Except for energy and insurance, because we can't cut those by 10%. We got to have a methodology to in fact do that. And we all know that our insurance premium, because of sexual molestation and fires and property, is all going up at a tremendous level, right? I also put in the most favorite one of every budget reduction, 100% of unrestricted travel and conference. Is that not, I'll give me a nod here, is that not always the first reduction, right? Oh, cut it, right? Now, at the same time, I want to advise you, I think that's the worst possible cut that you could do, because you're going to be laying people off. You're going to be asking people to do more work, and you got to have a system to train them, right? seriously, a big shout out to CASBO to having that professional development available for us at all times, and we're going to need it more than ever. So don't fall into that trap, or we're going to feel good because we're going to cut 100% of travel and conference, right? We got to think smart. We got to say, okay, what does that really do for us? Now, when you look at this, Awesome Unified, the worst case scenario is the green, and as we making changes is in the blue. So when you can see that by making that 10% cut, you can see that that's reducing the budget by millions of dollars. But when you look at the chart of what it's doing for our budget and the out years, it's not doing much for us, right? But we got to go through this process with people to show, guess what? 10% reduction in eliminating travel and conference is not going to solve this problem, right? And then we have the ammunition to say, and by the way, we got to look at other things. It's not going to just end here. I love this one, is let's put up cutting the entire district office. Okay, let's do it. Oh, it doesn't solve the problem. Okay, so now let's go look at the other scenarios. So if you go to the next slide, we'll go look at the scenarios. And these are really in the way that most districts think, because these are the things that they can do immediately. I can cut books and supplies. I can cut contracts, right? With board approval, I can reduce classified staff within 60 days. And unfortunately, that's what we do many of the times. And in this scenario, looking at what their number of classified employees was, reducing 100 FTE. Oh my God, that's a large number, right? But then look at what 100 classified layoffs does for the money. Not much. Why? Because instructional aides, custodians, and others are not paid to the same level as a lot of people within our school district. And again, when you lay off, you're laying off the least number of people. Now, all of these are things you're in the end more than likely going to have to do. But what you got to do is show everybody what each piece of this is. And when I'm saying lay off classified employees, 100 FTE, that's a hard discussion to have. But what we got to do is be able to have that number. And if we say, okay, well, I want it to be 150, I want it to be 50, whatever that number is, we've got to go through that. And this gives us, that solution. And for this, it was really only a little over $2 million. Next slide. Of course, one of the things from the Great Recession was furlough days, and especially when the state allowed us to have less than 180 days. But with that, if we did 5 furlough days starting in 2021 and then started restoring them out in 23, 24, you can see the impact. So it is not just 5 furlough days that's going to save us. It's not cutting travel and conference that's going to save us to be fiscally solvent, right? It's each one of these pieces. But what we are doing is with the software, being able to easily put this together. Now, anybody can do this with a spreadsheet, right? You can do this with a spreadsheet. But what you can't get, and what I think is the coolest part about all of this, is the ability to layer on, the ability to change, ability to, I'm going to save this version, I'm going to save that version, I can keep that. And when I'm in a budget meeting and somebody says, let's try this, I can easily put that forward. If we go to the next slide, again, these are just traditional conversations that are going to be had in every school district. And that next one is going to be certificated layoffs. Now, with certificated layoffs, we looked at Awesome Unified School District at 20.7 and moving them up to the 22.4, which was the highest, generated 78 FTEs. So it would be class size. It would move class size up, laying off 78 FTEs. Again, hard conversations. These are not things we want to bring forward. These are not the ideal situations. But again, every district got to talk about that. But notice there's no savings for us when I look at the charts until 21-22, because I can't lay them off until March, right? Unless I use the August layoff window. So this has to be a part of what I'm going to do, but it's also going to then show me what where I'm going to go. Now, when we think about that, what I'm going to try to do right now is I'm going to try and share my screen, but I don't have the ability to do that. Somebody's going to give that to me in a sec. There we go. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to look at this screen. So you should all be seeing my Fivecast screen, and this screen is all about class size and changing that, and said, okay, let's look at trying to do an August layoff. And what I love about this is it's a couple clicks. I'm going to go into Assumption Assist. I'm going to go into Staffing Changes. I'm going to go into FTE Changes. And remember, this is a declining enrollment school district, right? And so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make this minus, I'm going to add 78 teachers to that. I'm going to make that minus 98 teachers because I'm going to lay 78 of them off. I'm going to apply changes. I'm going to say, okay, well, that changes some stuff there. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to jump to here. Well, good thing it saved me. Are you sure you don't want to leave? No, I don't want to leave. I'm going to go, oops, look at that. It even saved me. Thank goodness it saved me. Look at that. All right, so now I'm going to go to Fivecast, and I'm going to say, okay, let's compare this August layoff to this layoff. And I'm going to say compare them. And I'm going to hit the dashboard. And I'm going to jump over to fund balance. And if my internet is working, that now shows me what the difference is. And if I do an August layoff back here,
Bill, I believe we lost you on audio.
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, where did you lose me at?
We lost you when the initial comparison between those two layoff scenarios took place.
Okay. So we put them together, and now I'm looking at the difference between the two, and so you can see that by a quick couple keystrokes, I can compare and visually show my committees, the superintendent, the association, what's really going to happen in relationship to our budget if we implemented an August layoff window versus a March. Now, all of those are hard conversations, but at least I have the ability to take care of that. All right, so I believe that we now should be back to the presentation. So if we wanted to jump to the next one, do I have control to do that now?
No, control's been passed back to Adam.
Okay, Adam, you're in charge again. Okay, so with that, we have an across-the-board salary reduction. So the governor of the state of California said, oh, we need to do a 10% salary reduction across the board. And if we don't do 10%, we're going to do furlough days. Why did he do that? Well, this chart shows you why he did it. Because that blue line, now that blue line is above for 2 years. Right? So taking that salary reduction in 2021, but then restoring it in 23-24, and I restored it at 5% per year, puts me negative again. But we're going to crawl out of this COVID-19 recession by some point. Now, nobody is going to agree to an across-the-board salary reduction unless it's the last resort, right? And so what we've got to do is we've got to think about how I'm going to take all of these things together. Now, if I wanted it to be 5%, I could just go in and pop in 5%, and away we go. So let's look at the next chart, and let's look at layering these on as we talk about it. So layering scenarios A and B, as I put these two together, reducing books and supplies and classified layoffs, I'm changing that picture again. And these are easy to quickly put together. Do the next one. Same thing now. I'm layering them on. I'm going to say all employees take a furlough day. I'm solving my budget problem by layering on these pieces. Go into the next one. Now I'm going to do that that certificated layoff in 21-22, not in August. And you can see it gets me to almost being not broke by the end of 21-22. Okay, and then you go to the next one. And now here, what we did was we took all of those things together, but we didn't need to do a 10% across the board salary reduction. So what we did is we scaled that back till we were making our reserves, and that required a 5% across the board. And once again, anybody can do this, right? But what it is the ability to be able to quickly turn it and do it in a way in which people understand what you're doing. Many of you have great budget committees, and they know immediately when you give them a spreadsheet with a 0.5% per day, if you do a furlough day, and they'll do the math in their head. Other people know that we have people on the budget committee where math is not their strong suit, right? And we know who those guys are. Why are you smiling, sir? We know who those guys are. So with that, we want to be able to have credible numbers, want to be able to show it and demonstrate it, and be able to have all of these every time we come up with an idea or a suggestion or thing. We want to put it out there. Here's what it'll do. This is our best guess. We always love Ron Bennett on multi-year projections. My multi-year projection is exactly wrong, right? Partially correct, right? It's the assumptions, but we're never not going to do anything. We're going to do something, and it's about a process to take it to that next level. Now, these are all things we all think about. You've already thought about them. Some of you may have already put them in your budget, right? I would say don't put it in your budget. Make sure you have a process, and Vince is going to lead us through that process of how to think about these ideas and come to more stakeholder involvement and utilizing tools that are going to help you make your point.
Okay, well, thanks, Bill, because, Bill gave us some really great information and charts and analytics to get us down to that micro level. So, yes, the process itself, once we've identified that the problem, the magnitude, we want the board to sort of set some objectives and criteria. And so minimizing or avoiding layoffs is certainly one of the ones that most districts would look at. The big categories would be protecting the core, short-term, long-term fiscal solvency, and having a balanced approach to employee salaries and work years. So if we take a look at the avoid and minimize layoffs, a lot of people will turn to, retirement incentives. And I know we did that during the Great Recession. One of the things my district did during the Great Recession is we actually took a look at, well, what's holding a lot of people who are at those very senior, levels, to teacher levels and things like this, where they've been around for a long time. They're right on the edge. They'd like to retire, but what's holding them back? Usually it's the benefits. So it's their health benefits. And what we had done one year is we decided, well, let's try to get as many people to go. We don't want to, we knew we need to reduce staff, but we don't want to spend a lot of money on the SERP because it does take up a lot of that savings. So we offered what I call the golden hug. And this was where we would say, well, if the benefits is what's holding you up, if we offer you an increase in retiree benefits that'll get you to 65 and will allow you to actually maintain a single plan for yourself for medical and things, would you go? And a lot of people said they would, so we offered it, had over 80 some odd people take that particular offer that year, saved some money. So that's just one approach. Protecting the core, of course, academic programs. We want to maintain the basic core academics. We want to maintain the basic support to our employees. We want to make sure that our facilities are in good condition. That goes to some of the areas of routine restricted maintenance, of course, but also deferred maintenance items. We know if you cut too deep in those areas, you'll only come back to spend more money later on. And of course, then reduce or eliminate maybe programs if you can. And this is the area where boards need to decide in order to ensure their short-term, long-term fiscal solvency. They really do need to go out 3 years or more to make sure that whatever solutions they put into place is going to get them to that third year. One of my concepts and what I learned early on is you cut early, you cut deep, you cut once, and then you ride it through. If you can do that, a lot of districts don't want to cut early and deep, so later on they'll be actually cutting more in the outer years if they don't, but those are local district decisions. And of course, always make sure a balanced approach to your employees and salary and benefit options. We know when we get down to the end of all this, the supplies and contracts and other areas in your budget, the non-personnel areas, are not going to get us all the way to where we need to be. So we know we're going to get to those personnel areas, but we need to do all those other areas first. Let's go to the next slide. So there we go. So collecting the ideas, that was one of the things that we said that let's get all stakeholders involved, get ideas that we can start to look at, not just the ones that the business office comes up with or some of the other departments, but board suggestions, to all the management team suggestions, classified certificated employee suggestions, and maybe other groups that you may have and been working with. And let's price those out. Let's have them reviewed by those division heads or department heads that they may be affecting, just so we know, are these viable options? And so let's go to the next slide. So as we take a look at, how do we do that? Well, here's just a suggestion, using some sort of a collection sheet that's very simple, straightforward, but gives the basic information. This particular one used during the Great Recession. This one is, you have a department or a division, the item name of the item that you've given to what you want to reduce, the total dollar amount, then a description, and then the impact. That star down there is an important thing because the impact of how is this going to affect. So you may have a suggestion that comes in, you cost it out, you give it the description, but the impact is so horrendous that you may not want to implement that suggestion. So let's give it an example of what that may look like. Let's go to the next slide. So here's one. Actually did this back in 2010, 11. You can see by the screen there what it says. And it's a reduce of 5 positions in management area. Of course, we all know that if you're going to go to the unions and ask them to your associations to take a reduction, they're going to say, well, where's yours first? And so we need to make sure that we're doing that. And so here the description was to reduce 5 management positions, and mainly through attrition and then transferring those areas, whether of responsibilities to maybe some other departments and things like that. The impact on this, of course, is it's going to require other administrators to assume additional responsibilities, and it could lead to some burnout. So. But those are just, this is just an example. So what does this look like when we put it all together into a document that may end up, going to a board? So again, here's the suggestion. You put these evaluated suggestions into some sort of a categorization. And what we want to do is look at each one of these items and say, is this an ongoing or one-time savings? Is it in our general unrestricted or restricted fund area, or is it personnel or non-personnel, or is it in a different fund? And then you want to assign each one of these items a level. If it's a non-personnel, like a supply level, you probably want to put it into a level 1. That would be the first things to be implemented. And then level 6 would be those things where you go into your unions, you got to negotiate for furlough days or across-the-board salary reductions. So let's take a look and see what that looks like when you put it together here. So here's the chart that will show on that left column the level. So you see levels 1, 2, 3, and then down at the bottom 6. And then you see the N or Ps, that's whether it's personnel or non-personnel related. You can see going over from the item description and then the FTEs. How many FTEs? and then the categorization, whether it's unrestricted, whether it's general fund, unrestricted, ongoing, or one-time, and unrestricted, ongoing, or one-time general fund, and then other funds. You can see at the bottom the totals. So in this case, the totals of this particular exercise was about 200 and over 200 FTE. That may be recommended. And then all the way over on the right side, you can see the total dollar amount where all these would be added up. This one was about $20.7 million worth of suggestions. From here, you can really start to, put together a plan that can start to go to the board in some kind of an order that allows us to really take a look at this as a board item. So let's go to the next slide. And so this one here is just going to be a summary of what I was just talking about, what Bill and Adam talked about. Is if we follow this kind of a process, it makes it easy to follow. We use graphics, we use charts that can really give summary kind of descriptions, and but we have those backup pages with a really good narrative on each item specifically if we need to go back and check and see what that really does. We have talked about the criteria that we set that the board would want to be leading the way we do these particular reductions. We got the soliciting suggestions and costing them out. And of course, we use historical data, comparative data to find some of these opportunities. We also look at the graphical ways to compare solutions and options like Bill was showing us. So from here, I'm going to turn it back to Jeff to let him kind of make some conclusions as to what we've talked about. And then I'm sure Sarah will open it up to questions.
Well, Vince, Bill, and Adam, thank you very much. Just fantastic information. I think one of the themes that we saw throughout all three advisors' conversations was it looks a lot like the Great Recession. And if you think back to how your district was operating through that Great Recession, you were still very successful school districts, and you were still successful in educating kids. And it's some of the practices, some of the staffing levels, and some of the expenditure control that you're going to have to go back to get through this particular storm. These decisions are not easy. They are incredibly complex, and they are going to require a really open conversation with your stakeholders. Bill talked a lot about being very clear and being able to layer these different scenarios on top of each other so that you don't overcut, but you want to make sure that you are moving in a direction of fiscal solvency. Looking at your peer districts, getting that data together to make informed decisions, understanding if there are districts that are like you in the state that might be more efficient in one area or the other, modeling what they are doing can certainly benefit you as you go through this complex process. And make sure that it's always clearly communicated. Make sure that you operate from that high level, but you bring it down to the macro level. Districts are very complex, and there's a lot of moving parts. But it looks like, based on listening to our advisors, that certainly California school districts have been there before. They were successful in navigating out of the Great Recession. And I assure you that by utilizing the data, comparative information, scenario building, and clear, concise communication with your board and your stakeholders, California districts will navigate through this challenge as well. So in order to get you started on work like this, we have actually created a customized expenditure analysis story for every school district in California. And the next slide will give you the information on how you can get that expenditure story. And this story will go through several different areas of expenditures for your district compared to your peer districts, and really start identifying or zeroing in on places where you can begin that investigation. So to get your customized expenditure story, contact Bob Manicus, and his information is there on the screen now. And if you're learning more about anything that you've heard about and you're not a Forecast5 client yet, Bob is a perfect resource for that particular conversation. If you are a Forecast5 client already, reach out to Adam if you want to investigate more on the comparative data and how you can use that for informed decisions, or reach out to Melissa or Bill if you want to look at scenario building, layering those scenarios together, and clearly and concisely communicating with your board. So with that, Sarah, I will open it up to see if there are questions.
Thank you, Jeff. And so we do have one question, and due to time, we will ask folks to please contact your staff directly. But the question that we received is, where is this data being pulled from? Is it the district's unaudited actual data year after year? And if so, is this when was the latest data available?
Adam?
Yes, so the historical data we looked at would be the SACS unaudited actuals, and the most recent financial year available is the 18-19 school year.
Okay, and then there's a burning question that we will pose to you. For LEA, for our LEA, is how do you make these cuts when the present reopening guidance are calling for smaller class sizes, morning, afternoon sessions to adhere to social distancing and COVID-related protections? Any thoughts?
Once someone figures that out, they will be on every seminar, everything, because that is the million-dollar question, and it's what's going to haunt schools with having to open up under the social distancing requirements and take the reductions. And Sarah and Casbo is working hard to change the May revise into something that we could live with, but in the end, if the state of California says this is how much money you get, we are expenditure managers, not revenue generators. And unfortunately, that will fall to the business office and the superintendents and the boards and all of the community to come up with solutions that are going to work. Just a closing thing, that the stuff that you saw me do, I actually did, and Sherry's sitting up, I actually did. Now, a lot of help and training from Melissa and Adam. But I want everybody to know, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I believe him. But I wanted to provide then a little outlook of what to expect tomorrow. The Assembly is going to be reviewing the Senate plan in the legislature. The hope is that the Assembly and the Senate align, which means that the Senate rejected the governor's proposals to reduce the local control funding formula, rejected the categoricals in the hope of expecting federal resources and increasing and then relying on the deferrals of $5.3 billion in 21-22. And so there's still a lot to be determined. Tomorrow we were told that the Assembly will make a determination of what their stance is on the budget. And so we know that the hearing, subcommittee number 6 on the Assembly Budget Committee, is expected to meet tomorrow at 10. Once we have those details, Elizabeth and I will be releasing a news break. If you don't receive them, we're more than happy to share that information and get that to you as soon as possible. And then the discussions begin with the governor. At the end of the day, it has to be negotiated between the big three: the Assembly Speaker, the Senate Pro Tem President, Tony Atkins from San Diego, and Governor Newsom. So this is it's been every day a roller coaster, but our goal is to always ensure that we give you the up-to-date information, and we'll continue to provide you with additional information. Any questions that were not answered today, we will redirect them to Forecast5 and get you information as soon as possible. The Q&As from previous workshops we are finalizing as we were vetting all the answers, and will be posted on our CASBO website as well as released to all of the attendees. We thank you so much for participating today. Thank you, Team Forecast5. We truly appreciate the partnership. And with that, thank you so much for attending today's session.
Have a great one.
Thank you for having us.